Good morning. My name is Terry White, and before I just start my talk, I wanted to put a bit more of my background into this. My background is from teaching. It's headship of schools and community colleges, and most of my life has been involved in design of schools, working both in the private and the public sector. We're a commercial organisation that has an interest in education, and we were pleased that we were invited to contribute 2 chapters to this particular publication we've been talking about today. Prior to that, we'd created a book called Planning Learning Spaces in Practice. We developed that book with a colleague, Murray Hudson, who's the managing director of Gratnall's. Gratnall's taking a wider interest in their products and education on a greater scale, and myself. And what we were trying to do was to look at good practice, celebrate good practice, and to see where there were common themes that would run through good practice in order to celebrate excellence in design. And we were really keen that this publication took a fusion between architecture and education. Herman Hertzberger was keen to be involved in the forward, as was Sir Ken Robinson. And as we discussed this with them and planned the publication and brought a range of colleagues from many disciplines into the process, we started to see the synergies, the capabilities that we could create if we actually had more of a fusion between those processes. And then our journey going through this process was very much influenced by this report. I'm sure many people have looked at this report in the audience today. If you haven't, it's well worth looking at, because what it does is it creates a strong agenda for change. And the agenda for change that it creates reinforces the things that actually we believe in ourselves, I think, which is that the pedagogy and the social interactions within schools need to be identified. They need to be, I suppose, articulated in a way that they can be shared and developed with others. But also, what it does is that those learning behaviours that are within our approach to schools and education need to be better defined. They need to be better articulated. And with that, we can develop a learning brief that I think is much more effective and can be handed on and shared. The other thing it strikes for us as a process is it asks for a wider engagement of people in the process, a range of people. It talks about new players coming into the design of schools. And currently, there are many players in the design of schools, but there are many organizations and commercial organizations that want to innovate, but sometimes can't get into the process at the front end to improve that process of innovation. And as we were going through the process, and I agree we want to be positive today, we were finding a number of challenges in trying to develop this sort of process. 2 of the challenges are on the top. The first was that we weren't seeing the reflection of the skills and challenges for the future that our young people need built into the spaces in schools. It was happening, but it wasn't happening to the extent that we needed it to do, especially about space and place. There are specialist facilities, but young people need a place to belong to, a place to relate to. And often that isn't designed through the process. And then the other thing was that I was finding, as a head teacher and a designer, that I was told, well, you can't have the consultation, it takes too long. It delays the build program. Actually, it's a diversion. And our view was to create a process where we could have a better informed design brief that everybody could be involved with, and we felt that that actually would improve the ability to hand that on to a range of other people. And beneath that are some points of the challenges that we actually met. So what we decided to do was to create planning and learning spaces in practice as a design framework. We were very much influenced by John Holt. All my life, he's influenced me as a teacher and a head teacher, learning being the activities of young people, and those activities need to be the things that shape our design. And so we created this design framework. And we started off with a focus on the vision and values of the school. We often found in design that the vision and values so critical to the way we do things in school, our relation with our community, were ignored. And ignoring them for us meant that change and transition through learning spaces became more difficult. We then knew that we had to work with teachers and communities to celebrate what was good in a school, how things were working really well. But actually, what's the next practice? Where do you want to go next? How do you define that next practice? Because if you can't define the next practice that you want, you're never going to be able to evaluate whether design is working for you. And then going through that whole process, then how do we take that into behaviors and design indicators that can drive the design of spaces? And then as we've done that, how do we take all of that and apply it to a primary school, a special school, a secondary school, to actually say, so will it deliver the curriculum that we want? But then importantly, in our work, in our project schools, we then take it and say, well, how does that integrate with the school? Because whether it's a new build or a remodeling program, it needs to integrate with the purpose and the planning of a school. And often the two things sit uncomfortably together. And then the change doesn't happen in the way that people want it to take place. So this is the framework that we developed. And this slide just reinforces some more of that. But in the center of the slide, because schools, as colleagues have said earlier, they are systems, they need to integrate. So when we're talking to staff and communities and young people about the process, then we're thinking about what is the pedagogy? What is the curriculum experience that we really want to create? How do we organize learning in this building? Because the organization of learning in the building is often something that actually disrupts a design. How do we have leadership of learning? Is it at all levels? Is it just a head teacher saying this is what we're going to do? Or is everybody at every level in the process engaged to contribute to that process? And then how is community engaged in the design of a school? Commercial organizations need to be involved in this. Planning learning spaces and planning learning spaces in practice is promoted by an organization that makes trays and resources and equipment. And it actually started to think differently across the organization about its contribution to learning through developing processes, through thought leadership, through running conferences. And so across the Gratnals, things were changing for people to take that wider interest that people have suggested earlier is really important. That allowed us then to think about the curriculum. It started to allow us to prototype, to actually create design thinking strategies, to actually think very differently about our work with schools and achieving some really good results as part of that process. What it did also was to create spaces which were very different. This is all through a space in a special school, all through a very different creative space to what was on the original plan for the school. It also allowed us to deal with the applied and practical learning. And here we have a makerspace designed with us and other suppliers to make a very different feel for the rite of passage of young people with special needs. We have started to develop these processes. The top one, I think, is where we need to go next, that everybody in the system, everybody needs to think differently and contribute differently to think about education of the future. That needs to be more engaging and more developmental, and I think that would help us a great deal for design for future learning. I'll close there. We often talk about bridging the gap between those who design schools and those who live and work in schools. Often people talk about joining up the dots. I think for me, all of us individually and with our organizations and in the areas in which we work need to think more creatively about how we contribute to the contemporary design for the future. Thank you.